Okay, in this video we're going to actually talk about how to create and write some of these progressions and some of these cadences that we've been talking about. And the first thing we have to learn how to do is talk about chords in terms of root tone motion. In other words, when one chord moves to another chord, we want to be able to categorize that progression. And we want to do it in terms of root tone motion. So in order to make this useful, we're going to limit root tone motions just to three types. Those of the interval of the second, those of the interval of the third, and those of the interval of the fifth. So a simple example. A 4 chord moves to a 5 chord. We say that the root tone is up a second. So if we are in the key of C, for example, an F chord, the 4 chord, moving to a G chord, the 5 chord, that F to G is the interval of the second. Now, if a 5 chord moves down to a 4 chord, then we'll also say it's root tone motion of the second, but we'll say it's down a second. Now, when a 1 chord moves to a 5 chord, we'll say that that is root tone motion of the fifth, going up a fifth. When a 1 chord moves to a 4 chord, you might say, well, that's root tone motion of the fourth, but we want to just limit root tone motion to seconds, thirds, and fifths. So when 1 goes to 4, we're going to say that's down a fifth, which in fact a 1 chord to a 4 chord is down a fifth. So the root tone motion designation is the theoretic distance of the root tone motion, not necessarily the actual distance found in the bass line. Now here are some examples of root tone motion in seconds and fifths. Now notice that not all of the chords are in root position. The first example, a 4 chord is going to a 5 chord, so that's easy. That's up a second, root tone motion up a second. The next one is a 4 chord going to a 5 chord again. The notes are a little bit mixed up. It's F-A-C. This one has an A in the bass. So we're still going to call that root tone motion up a second. We're not describing the bass line, notice. We are describing the motion of the root tones and where they are going. The third example is a 5 chord going to a 4 chord. We'll call that root tone motion down a second because G is going to F. And the last example is another G chord going to another F chord. Notice the bass is going up because that second chord, F-A-C, the root is not in the bass, it's in a different voice. So again, we're not looking at the bass. We're looking at the root tones theoretically, and we're saying that G going to F is down a second. This next group have to do with fifths. So we've got a 5 chord going to a 1 chord, a G chord going to a C chord, that's down a fifth. Next, we have a C chord going to an F chord. Now again, even though it looks like that's going in the direction up a fourth, we're not going to call it that. We're going to call it down a fifth, so that it fits in the same category as the G chord going to the C chord. The next one is a C chord going to a G chord. We're going to call that up a fifth. That's, I think, pretty clear. And the last example is a 4 chord going to a 1 chord. Again, we're not looking at the direction of what's happening in the bass. We're just trying to put that into the category of a fifth. And we're saying that theoretically, yes, a 4 chord going to a 1 chord, the F to C, is up a fifth. Okay, so now that we are able to categorize these different kinds of progressions, let's come up with some rules and procedures that helps us to actually write these kind of progressions. So, first one, whenever we have root tone progressions moving by fifth, whether it's up or down, here are some guidelines for getting good voice leading. Number 1, keep the root tones in the bass, because for now we're doing everything in root position. That'll change in a few weeks and a few modules, but not now. Everything is root position. 2, find a common tone that you can retain in one of the upper 3 voices. In other words, a tone that the first chord has in common with the second chord, and then keep it in that same voice. Maybe it's the soprano, maybe it's the tenor, maybe it's the alto. Keep it in that same voice. Finally, move the other 2 voices stepwise, just by 1 step, into the chord tones that produce the complete chords with a proper doubling. Now remember, the proper doubling always means you're doubling the bass, which is the root tone. So here's an example. We're in the key of G, and we're going to go from a 1 chord to a 5 chord. So here are the notes. It's the 1 chord is G, B, D, and the 5 chord is D, F sharp, A. So first, identify the common tone. Can you see that both of these chords have a D? So that's the common tone. So we're going to write that first chord, the 1 chord, in a particular spacing. In this example, we're writing it in open spacing. You can see that it's G, D, B with another G. There's 2 Gs, and that's exactly what we're supposed to do. Double that bass tone. Then we already decided that the common tone is a D. So find the D. And there it is. Notice in the tenor. So you're going to write that tone in the tenor again for the 5 chord, for that next chord. That's called keeping a common tone. Okay, so for the bass, just put the root tone, because that's all we're doing for now. Everything's in root position. So put a D in the bass. Now we've got to fill out the rest of this 5 chord. So the chord is D, F sharp, A. Find a good place for the F sharp. Find a good place for the A. Try to make those notes move as small a distance as possible, which really is the fundamental rule of voice leading, is try to make all the voices move as smooth as you can. So look, the G can go to the F sharp, and the B can go to the A. And that completes the chord. You've got good voice leading. Let's try another example. This is in the key of A, 3 sharps. We're going to go from a 1 chord to a 4 chord. This is progression by the 5th. So we're going to use the same rule that we used before. First, voice the first chord. Notice that this one is in close spacing. We've got A, and then E, and then A, and C sharp. And those upper 3 notes are less than an octave. The distance between the soprano and the tenor is less than an octave. Take a look at the 2 chords that we're trying to write and see they both have the pitch A. All right, so find the A in the 1 chord. There it is in the alto. Keep it in the alto for the 2nd chord. That's the common tone. Then, in the 2nd chord, put the root tone in the bass. That's the D, because it's a D, F sharp, A chord. You've got 2 more notes to write. You've got to double that D. You've got to put another D in that chord, and you need an F sharp. Write them as close as you can from the notes that you wrote on the 1st chord. So that C sharp goes up to D, and that E goes up to F sharp. So go ahead, try check your understanding 6.2, and you get to actually take a pair of chords. The first one's written for you. Write the 2nd chord. These are all examples of root tone motion in 5th. So you're going to do them the same way. You're going to just write the root tone of the 2nd chord and put it in the bass. Then you're going to find the common tone and leave that in the same voice. Then you're going to try to figure out how to complete the chord. All right, so the second rule we have in this module here is voice leading for root tone motion in seconds. All right, so here is the rule for root tone motion moving in seconds. Number 1, keep the root tones in the bass voice, right? So that's the same. We're always doing in root position. And then move the upper 3 voices contrary to the bass. Now, this rule actually makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it, if you're going to take a chord and you're going to move it by root tone motion of the 2nd, that's just a step up. If you move all of the notes a step up, can you see that you're going to have parallels? You're going to have parallel 5ths, you're going to have parallel octaves, all those forbidden parallels we talked about in the last module. So this is how you avoid it. This is, if you follow this rule, you won't have to worry about those issues of the forbidden parallels. Again, you've got the bass. Take a look at what direction the bass is moving. Take a look at the top notes and move them in the opposite direction, as close as possible to one of the chord tones. Let's try it. Here we are in the key of E flat, and we're going to go from a 4 chord to a 5 chord. That's a really good progression. The 4 chord is a dominant preparation chord. We learned that in the last module. And the 5 chord is the dominant chord. So 4 does like to go to 5, actually. That's root tone motion of the second. So the first chord here has been voiced. It's in a nice open position. A flat, E flat, and C. Those are the 3 notes of the chord, A flat, C, and E flat, with 2 A flats, because we've doubled the bass pitch, which is what we should do. And then we're going to go to the 5 chord, B flat, D, F. So first put the bass note in. The A flat will go up to B flat. Those are just the root tones. And then take note that that voice is moving stepwise up. So in which direction should all the other voices move? You got it, down. So that top note, C in the first chord, where should it go? It should go to the closest note that belongs to the second chord, but in a downward direction. So the C of the first chord could go to the B flat of the 5 chord. That's just a step lower. And the E flat could move down to the D of the second chord. And the A flat, finally, can move down to the F of the second chord. So now you can go ahead and try, check your understanding. In this example, you've got, again, chords that are moving by the interval of the root tone of the second. So just follow that rule, put the bass note in first, and move all of the other voices in contrary motion. That's the opposite direction of whatever the bass did. And you should be just fine. We've talked about forbidden parallels. We have one other category of forbidden things when we do voice leading, and that's called forbidden melodic intervals. Now, when you move from a 4 chord to a 5 chord in a minor key, just go ahead and follow the same rules that we talked about before with root tone motion of the second. But it is really important to be careful with this progression in minor, because it does present the possibility of a forbidden melodic interval, which is the interval of the augmented second. There are really 2 forbidden intervals that we have melodically when we do chorale style writing. One is the augmented second, and the other one is the tritone. It's not that we never write those things, but when we first learn the style, we want to really try to avoid that and be sensitive to those intervals. So, as you know, when you're in a minor key, you got to raise leading tones, right? You're using harmonic minor when you write your chords, and you probably recall that that affects the 5 chord, the third of that 5 chord, and the 7 chord, the root of the 7 chord. This is just when you're in a minor key. You don't have to worry about this when you're in a major key. Okay, but this could present a potential problem in one of the melodies whenever you're going from a 5 chord or going out of a 5 chord, or the same thing, into or out of a 7 chord. So take a look at the harmonic minor scale. The interval from scale degree 6 to scale degree 7, if it's been raised, is an augmented second. So this interval is very hard to sing, and generally you avoid it in part writing. As I said, one other interval that's hard to sing is the augmented fourth or diminished fifth, the tritone. And you will find that in a major key, actually, between scale degree 4 and scale degree 7. So in your voice leading, you avoid these melodic intervals of either the augmented second or the tritone. Here is a little illustration of this. You're in the key of C minor. Take a look at the 4 chord. That's F, A flat, and C. And then take a look at the 5 chord. With the raised 7th, that's G, B, and D. Now, if you allowed those voices just to all move parallel and all move up from the 4 chord to the 5 chord, you'll see right there in the middle that there will be an augmented second in that middle voice. How do you avoid it? Easy. Just follow the rule that I already taught you. And that is, whenever you have chords that are moving by the root tone motion of the second, whatever direction the bass is going here, in this case that F is going up to G, move those upper voices in the opposite direction, and then you won't get that problem. A little hard to see there, but in 4-part writing, I think it's a lot more clear. Let's take a look. Here's the 4 chord, written again, this time in 4 parts, close spacing. It's F, F, 2 Fs, A flat, and C. Going to the 5 chord, G, B natural, and D. Look, the bass tone F is going up to G. That's root tone motion by the second. And look at the soprano. It went in contrary motion to the bass, down a step. The alto, contrary motion to the bass, down. And the tenor, contrary motion to the bass. Okay, so we're following the rule. Now, to complete that progression, you see 5 goes to 1. That's root tone motion by the fifth. So you keep a common tone. Do you see what the common tone is? I'm hoping you can maybe take a look at that and see, oh yeah, in the alto, there is a common tone between the 5 chord and the 1 chord on the G.